ask you, I'm sure you've seen the story as well. America desperately wants countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, to increase oil output in the aftermath of the war, and they've not been obliging. In fact, the Wall Street Journal story a few weeks ago suggesting that the rulers of both Saudi Arabia and UAE even refused to take a phone call from the White House. If traditional allies of the United States, for their own interests, and nobody should be sitting in judgment of what the Saudi Arabians are doing or what the Emiratis are doing, for their own interests, they choose to look the other way and not take a side in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, why can't the same apply to India? Why is India then suddenly characterized as somewhat shaky?
First, let's bring it back to the facts of the matter. I mean, Biden used the word shaky. If you don't like the word shaky as a statement of fact, let's use the word cautious. And India has been very cautious. It has not only not condemned the Russian invasion, not taken a side, it refused for quite some time to use the word invasion. It has not made any condemnation of the expansion of the Russian attacks, which now are focusing on civilian sites, with mass killing of civilians across Ukraine. Now, I understand that India is doing that because, of course, its largest provider of military hardware is Russia. It buys a great deal of Russian oil. So another fact of the matter is that Washington, beyond Biden's statement, has said to India, publicly said yesterday, look, we'll work with you to find alternative sources of military equipment. We'll work with you to find alternative sources of oil, if that's what it takes. So what was happening from Australia and Japan, not just the US, it was a sugar and spice approach. Australia and Japan saying, we appreciate what you've done so far, but the US saying, look, it may be time for you to go farther, which brings me to the second point. The US versus Russia narrative is a diversion. It's a diversion to hide behind the choices that may need to be made. Look, US foreign policy should be criticized on a number of fronts, both past and indeed present, and we can do that. But the fundamental here is not about the United States. It's about Russia versus Ukraine, and then against the international community. And of course, why is that? The front line is the Ukrainians themselves, who are bearing the brunt of the Russian invasion. And secondly, this invasion, in fact, is trying to rip up the rules of the game, as imperfect as they are. Because think about it from your perspective in India. If Vladimir Putin can go in and occupy most of Ukraine by claiming, oh, I'm just protecting myself, China tomorrow could attack India by claiming, well, you're part of the Quad, you're part of America, and they're lined up against us. Pakistan could attack India tomorrow saying, well, you've got extremists in your government, and your government, therefore, is harboring far-right elements.
No, Professor, I'm sure you're aware that we have been having an issue with the Chinese for the last 2 years now at the line of actual control. And last time I checked, I don't think America particularly cared about it. I've not seen any statements of public condemnation from any senior White House officials. I've not seen any kind of military or non-military help in that regard. So, I mean, it's clear to us. I mean, that's our fight, and we got to fight our fight. That's okay.
In fact, I think if you probably check with the Delhi government, not just the United States, but many other governments were putting messages quite quietly to India and China, indeed to Pakistan, for everybody to back off over the line of control. But be that as it may, the broader point which I made is this. If you say we don't have a dog in this fight, forgetting the fact that perhaps you should care when civilians are being killed by anybody in an invasion. If you say we don't have a dog in this fight, what you're effectively saying is, look, because the Russians are doing it, we don't really care that the rules are being broken. But when if the Chinese then do it, or the Pakistanis then do it, you might care at that point. In other words, what I'm trying to get this discussion away from is US versus Russia.
Can I draw your attention to the statement that was put out by the Indian ambassador at the United Nations when India decided to abstain the vote? And I think 3 out of the 4 paragraphs were about how there needs to be an immediate cessation of hostilities. India does not accept, using force to unilaterally and deliberately change the territorial integrity of sovereignty of another country. But be all of that as it may, I want to ask General Prasad. My problem is with this fundamental premise that Biden has had, and now some of it is being echoed by Professor Lucas as well, that if you do not choose the West's position on this Russia-Ukraine fight, then you're against us. then you're, bracketed as against freedom, then you're bracketed as pro-Putin. I mean, I don't get it. It's almost like the famous Bush saying, right? Either you're with us or you're against us. Why is everything being reduced to this binary that if you don't vote the way the West has voted, then you're with Putin? You are supporting a dictator. You're supporting what the West is characterizing as modern-day Hitler. I mean, why this binary? General Prasad.
Zaka, are we shaky or are we stable? I think certainly not shaky, it's outright stable. How is stability being shown to us? The Australian Prime Minister speaks to our Prime Minister. The Japanese Prime Minister visits India. The Pakistani Prime Minister says Indian foreign policy is very stable. The Israeli Prime Minister is visiting us soon. The Chinese Foreign Minister is visiting us soon. Is it stability or is it shaky? What is America's interest in this region? The America's interest in the South China Sea, in making sure that Taiwan remains somewhat an American ally, and therefore in the Quad, the Americans need India more than anybody else does. Of course, we are very grateful to be a member of the Quad. We continue to be. We're very happy to be members of the Quad. But what exactly is the American interest? Do they realize that a fair amount of, in the last few years, we got a lot of American equipment. Their industry has prospered because we have bought American equipment. And to say that we are taking sides is something like your way or my way or the highway.
Yeah.
That's not the way international relations work. The international relations are today working at a level at various issues. We have issues concerning climate. There is certain realignment on climate. There is certain economic realignments. There are certain political realignments. There are certain many other issues that on realignments take place. Everybody is looking at each of these issues independently as to how it supports its own nation.
Yep.
How are we going to go and take sides when we are very clear that Russians are friends of India? They came to India's assistance at the time of the Bangladesh war.
Correct.
You remember it very distinctly.
Correct.
They've offered us to take petrol in ruble and rupee trade. So India is getting, even though minuscule of what the entire Indian requirement is, but nevertheless, it's a gesture that we are appreciative of.
Okay.
Look at the way India is being a leader in the vaccine. So the point that I'm trying to make is this: the American interest is very much economic. They will continue to want us to be a market for their weapons. Mm-hmm. They want the entire world to be dependent on them for weapons. Who is benefiting from all of it?
And just as I close out, I know Maya's been raising her hand. Last 30 seconds, I just want to add this because somebody brought up the point of Israel. Israel, biggest ally of the United States, Naftali Bennett has not once in the last month publicly condemned Russia for what it's done. In fact, he's one of the few Western leaders who's actually gone to Moscow and met with Putin since this war began. But anyway, Maya, to close out the debate, please.
Sorry, Jaka, and thanks very much for letting me come back in. I just want to say one thing. You know, the economic imperative, the idea of Americans wanting to sell, get into Indian markets, all that is well taken. I think the question before India really is a simple one, and Scott Lucas kind of mentioned it. It's not about the West versus Russia. At this point, India as a country in the global committee of nations stands for certain values, and those values are in our constitution. They're enshrined on the basis of rights, on the basis of sovereignty, and on the basis of democracy. Now, by invading Ukraine, by questioning the territorial integrity, by targeting civilians, by enforcing, military aggression in this space, Vladimir Putin has clearly violated what India believes its fundamental principles to be.
Right.
So forget about what the U.S. wants us to do and what it doesn't want us to do.
Oh.
I think the question before India really is, what do we want to be in the world?
All right. I'm completely out of time. Yes, I agree with Maya in as much as, yes, there are principles and there is, of course, real politics. Then there is what is the pragmatic reality in front of you. India has clearly chosen to side with that pragmatic reality. And that reality today is that we are dependent on the Russians, whether it's for defense, whether it's for oil. And like I said, I mean, this is not our fight. We don't have a dog in this fight.